For 50 years, the man who built ABBA's musical soul kept his mouth shut and let the chords do the talking. Nobody noticed, because the songs were too bright to suspect shadows. Then, in 2024, at 78 years old, Benny Andersson sat down and said out loud what the music had been whispering since the beginning. It was not a shout. It was the quietest kind of earthquake, the sort that rearranges everything you thought you understood about joy, heartbreak, and the distance between the two. Before the sequins, before the choruses that conquered continents, Benny was a boy in Stockholm who spoke through his fingers. He was born in 1946 into a home full of sound, but what marked him was not a hunger for applause. It was a stillness. People who knew him in those early years remember a presence that was always partly somewhere else, a young man who could sit in a crowded room and still seem unreachable. He played in local bands, then joined the Hepstars, a group that some called Sweden's answer to the Beatles. The stage lights were hot, the crowds deafening, but even then Benny was chasing a feeling he could not name, something that lived just beyond the next note. He did not crave the gaze of the audience. He craved the shape of a melody that would finally say what he himself could not. When he met Bjorn Ulvaeus in the late 1960s, something locked into place. Two composers with opposing instincts found a way to build a single voice. Soon Agnetha and Annifrid joined, and the four of them began assembling a universe that the world was not quite ready to receive. But from the very first rehearsal, a strange economy took hold. Benny deposited his inner life into the music, and the music kept it safe. He did not process tension through conversation. He processed it through progression and refrain. If something was wrong, you would not hear it from his mouth. You would hear it in the minor turn of a bridge, in the sudden ache tucked beneath a chorus that was otherwise designed to make millions dance. That habit became the engine of a pop miracle and the vault of a private agony. ABBA was not merely a band. It was two couples strapped into the same glittering capsule, writing love songs while their own loves quietly unraveled. Benny married Annifrid in 1978. Bjorn and Agnetha had wed 7 years earlier. On the surface, the narrative was a fairy tale, 4 friends, perfect harmonies, timeless records. But by the late 1970s, the fractures were too deep to ignore. The marriages were failing. The personal conversations were loaded with things that could not be said in a vocal booth. And yet, every few weeks, the four of them would walk back into the studio, sit across from the person whose heart was breaking or whose silence was deafening, and record a song about longing. Think about the weight of that arrangement. You are composing a melody about abandonment, and the woman you are losing is 10 feet away, waiting to sing the words. You are layering a vocal about a love that has faded, and you must repeat it until the phrasing sounds effortless. That is not professionalism. That is emotional alchemy of the most volatile kind, and Benny was the one who mixed the chemicals without ever opening the safety valve. Later accounts would confirm that The Winner Takes It All was born in the rubble of Bjorn and Agnetha's divorce. The lyrics were Bjorn's, but the music, the stately, devastating architecture of it, came from Benny's hands. What did it feel like to sit at the piano and give shape to someone else's grief while carrying your own unspoken cargo? He never said. Not then. He wrapped the pain in a major key and handed it to the world as a dance floor masterpiece. When ABBA faded into silence in 1982, there was no farewell. No final concert, no press release that said the end. One moment they were everywhere, and the next they were a memory that refused to explain itself. Fans were left suspended, hungry for a closure that never arrived. Journalists probed and hit a polite wall. Bjorn spoke in time. Agnetha gave interviews that hinted at the cost. Annifrid offered glimpses. But Benny, the man who had composed the emotional blueprint of the whole enterprise, remained a fortress. He threw himself into new work, the musical chess, orchestral pieces, a stream of productivity that looked like forward motion. Yet people close to him during those years sensed a careful discipline, a man who had drawn a strict border around the past and would not step across it. Ask him about chord structures and he would lean in. Ask him about the divorces, about what it truly felt like to record One of Us while a marriage dissolved, and the conversation would glide away, smooth as a string arrangement, leaving no trace of disturbance. What was he protecting? Some assumed it was simple privacy, a deeply introverted man navigating pain the only way he knew how. That explanation is reasonable, but incomplete. Another possibility lurked, one that only decades could unlock. Perhaps the silence was not a refusal to speak. Perhaps it was the recognition that some truths are so deeply embedded in the music that pulling them into language would feel like a betrayal of the art itself. Maybe he was waiting for the right moment, or for the words to catch up with the chords. That moment arrived in 2024, draped in the calm of old age. The interview was ordinary in its setting. No dramatic lighting, no rising soundtrack, no tearful close UPS. Just a 78-year-old man speaking with the quiet certainty of someone who had already made his peace. What he confirmed was something fans had always felt but never had the authority to claim: the emotional reality inside ABBA, the love fracturing, the confusion, the longing that could not be spoken, was the raw material of every song. The hits were not clever pop constructs designed to please a market. They were, in Benny's own careful phrase, honest. More honest than he had ever publicly admitted. He acknowledged that the distance he kept from interviewers, from emotional disclosure, from the story others were building around the band, was deliberate. Not because he had something shameful to hide, but because, as he put it, some things belong to the music and not to the explanation of it. Once that sentence left his lips, the entire ABBA catalog shifted on its axis. Not the notes, but the way we hear them. Suddenly, the restraint in the winner takes it all is not just artistic choice. It is the sound of a man describing devastation from a careful distance because getting any closer would have undone him. The loneliness in one of us is not a scripted sadness. It is the echo of a real separation, folded into a 3-minute pop song. Even Fernando, a song that seems to be about war and memory, sits on a harmonic bed that Benny built during a period of deep personal reflection. The joy that made the world dance was real, but it was layered on top of something heavier, something that demanded a different kind of listening. Longtime collaborators have said that Benny worked from feeling first and theory second. He would find the emotional center of a piece before he found its shape. That meant the music was always, on some level, a diary entry. The production was glossy, the tempos infectious, but underneath, in the way a chord progressed from hope to resignation, the truth was hiding in plain sight. For half a century, the world heard the surface. The man who built the depths kept the secret, not out of deceit, but out of a deep belief that the music could carry the weight without his commentary. He was the ghost in the machine, the presence you felt but could never quite see. The question that lingers, long after the admission settles, is why now? Why at 78, with a lifetime of opportunity behind him, did Benny finally choose to open the vault? The answer lies in Voyage. When ABBA reunited to record new music for the first time in 40 years, it demanded that all 4 members return to the creative space they had each fled in different ways. For Benny, that meant sitting again in the studio with Bjorn, writing songs that had to come from an honest place. But it also meant sitting with the history of everything that space had produced, the glory and the cost. Sources suggest that the Voyage sessions involved long, difficult conversations between the 4 of them, conversations that went beyond music into what ABBA had been, what it had meant, and how the silence had shaped each of their lives. Benny emerged from that period not healed, exactly, but more honest. There is a particular kind of reckoning that arrives in your late 70s, a moment when the energy required to maintain a careful distance from the truth begins to feel heavier than the truth itself. The need to be remembered accurately begins to outweigh the need to be shielded. And so, Benny, the most private of them all, sat down and gave the world the key. Not a dramatic key, not a scandal, just the quiet confirmation that the emotions people had been moved by for 50 years had a genuine, human source. That is the real revelation. The music always told the truth. Benny just finally decided to confirm it. What we hear now, when we press play on any ABBA record, is not just a pop song. It is one man's carefully constructed emotional archive, 50 years of feeling pressed into 3-minute symphonies and handed to the world without a single spoken explanation, until a 78-year-old man decided the silence had served its purpose and the people who loved the songs had earned a glimpse of the heart that made them.